Okay. Is that tune? That sounds off.
A little sharper.
Sharp or flat? From the Kutimo on, and a little from Reb Shlomo, and I've got a very long story, Bezat Hashem, that hopefully I'll remember it all with my notes. So we're going to start over here. So the Kutimo on is divided up into two parts. There's the first part, and Tinyana is the second part. And in between, in some volumes, not in all of them, there's a little thing here. Welcome. Called Hashmata. And we know from the davening, when we talk about Purim, where it says that Haman wanted the Hashmit to wipe out all the Jews, right? And Hashmata means something that was left out. The Hashmit. Right, this is Hashmata, so it's connected. So here, it's something that was left out, something that was cut out, and then put in later on. So it's very short, and it's related to Avraham Avinu. Echad haya Avraham. So Avraham was Echad, and the reason I'm not translating is because it has many meanings. Avraham was one, Avraham was unified with Hashem, Avraham was the only one in the world. Right, at some point, Avraham Avinu was the only one that said, there's just Hashem, there's nothing else. So Avraham haya Echad, from Yechezkel. She'Avraham avad Hashem rak an yedei shaya echad. How was Abraham's service of Hashem? It was through this aspect of echad, of unity, of oneness. Shechashav b'da'ato shehu rak yechidi be'olam. He thought in his mind that he was the only one in the world. And this is how Rebbe Nachman builds the lessons. On the one hand, it's very simple. On the other hand, there's several layers to it. So he thought he was the only one in the world. You could say he felt like he was the only one that didn't believe in lots of gods in the whole world, or he felt like he was all by himself in the world. There could be two ways of understanding this. שחשב בדעתו שהוא רק יחידי בעולם, ולא יסתכל כלל על כל בני אדם. And he didn't look at all at anyone else in the world. ששרים מאחורי השם ומונעים אותו. That they're standing, that שרים מאחורי Hashem, that they're trying to take him off the path of Hashem and prevent him from serving Hashem. ולא על אביו ושאר המונים. He didn't look at his father and the other people that were preventing him. רק כאילו הוא אחד בעולם. Just as if he was the only one in the world. He pretended as if he was the only one in the world. Didn't let anyone distract him on his mission. רק כאילו הוא אחד בעולם. וזהו, and this is the meaning of אחד היה Avraham, that Avraham was one. וכן כל הרוצה לכנוס בעבודת Hashem. And so anybody who wants to serve Hashem, אי אפשר לו לכנוס כי אם על ידי בחינת שיחשוב שאין בעולם כי אם הוא לבדו יחידי בעולם. It's impossible for a person to serve Hashem unless, sorry, I lost my place here. אי אפשר לו לכנוס. It's impossible for a person to serve Hashem כי אם על ידי, unless it's through this aspect of, or connecting with, שיחשוב שאין בעולם, that he'll think that there's nothing in the world כי אם הוא לבדו יחידי בעולם. Nothing in the world but Hashem, or nothing in the world but that single person. So if a person, I don't remember where I heard this recently. So somebody asked, it was my sister-in-law. She was talking about Chabad Shluchim in Bangkok. And she asked them, how is it that you're surrounded by all these crazy people, bringing all of these crazy influences into your life, but you're the one who influences them, and they don't influence you? So the Shaliach said, it's because we're constantly giving. And when you're constantly giving off, then you're not going to receive from the person that you're giving to. So you can picture, for example, you turn on a faucet or a hose, and the hose is spraying out water. As long as the water is spraying out, nothing's going to come into the hose. And so that's what Avraham Avinu was doing. Avraham Avinu was out in the world, and he was focused on his mission. And even though everybody else is trying to influence him and tell him, you're out of your mind, this is not the way that things are supposed to be, he kept himself in kind of a bubble, because he knew the truth. And that was his way of serving Hashem, through this aspect of being echad. V'lo yistakel an shum adam hamon'o. And any person who's telling you, don't keep Shabbos, what are you keeping kosher for? What do you need all this religious nonsense for? Don't even bother listening to them. Kagon Aviv, this is what Avraham Avinu did. For example, his father, V'imo, his mother, Ochotno, V'ishto, Ovanav, V'chayotze, and his mother-in-law, and his sister, and his wife, and his children, and everyone else. O hamonim sheyesh mishar b'nei haolam. Or anybody else in the world who's trying to tell you living this life of being connected to Hashem and Yiddishkeit is totally insane. Hamaligim umasitim umonim me'avodato yitbarach. That they're making fun of him and they're trying to take him off the path of serving Hashem. V'tzarich shelo yachush v'yistakel aleim klal. And the person shouldn't even feel their presence, shouldn't look at them, shouldn't even feel their presence at all. Rak yiyeh b'chinat, it should just be this aspect of echad haya Avraham. Avraham was one. Ki'ilu hu yachid be'olam kanal. As if he was the only person in the world, as mentioned above. That's the lesson, tiny lesson, but it's one of my favorite lessons in the Likutei Moran. You think about Avraham Avinu, here's somebody who came from one of the richest families in Mesopotamia at the time, and they've got property, and they have connections, and they have money, and here he says, I'm just going to follow some totally different idea. In order to do that, and for example, for some of us, it's the same way. because some of us, myself, come from families that aren't religious. And when I started keeping Shabbos, the first thing my father said is, how are you going to make a living if you're keeping Shabbos? You got to work 7 days a week. You're not going to be able to make enough money. I said, well, let Hashem figure that out. And I actually started becoming a Baal Tshuva, started the process when I was 17, and I was still living at home till I was 19, and I was working for my father. So my first year I was in community college, because I was a really bad student in university. Then eventually I got into really good graduate programs, and I became a good student, but I had to be a bad student in order to have the motivation to be a good student. Because when all my friends went off to university and I was left by myself in my parents' home, I'm like, well, this really sucks. I got to figure things out, and that's what made me into a good student. So I would go to university, I would go to the college in the morning, and then the afternoons and evenings I worked for my father in his eyeglass store. And at some point I said to him, why don't we try closing the store on Shabbos and see if it brings you more money? Because he's on Miami Beach, and there's a lot of religious Jews. Even on his little cards, when a customer would come in the store, it would say, Mr., Mrs., Dr., Rabbi. There were so many rabbis that came in that there was an option to circle rabbi. They said, look, we'll put a big mezuzah on the door. I put a mezuzah like this big on his door. And we're going to write a big sign, closed on Shabbos. And let's see what happens. So he said, okay, I'll try it. For you, my son, I'll try it. So one Shabbos is closed, another Shabbos is closed. And that was like 2 years he was closed on Shabbos. And all the religious Jews came there. The problem was religious Jews don't spend so much money. So he had so many people coming there, but they weren't spending as much money as, for example, Japanese customers. We once had these Japanese customers come into the store. And I worked in the store since I was 12 years old. My father says to me, go out and sell some glasses. So I go to these guys and say, they're looking at the sunglass section. Say, what do you guys want? And they hardly spoke any English. It was the strangest thing. They started snorting cocaine in the store. They had this leather briefcase, and they did a line of cocaine, and all the guys like, with a dollar bill. I sold them like $10,000 worth of sunglasses. And my father was very happy with that. So then eventually I got into university, and I moved away to New Jersey, and I came back and I said, hey, what's with the sign for Shabbos? Like, oh, we don't make enough money. I just did it for you. So for those 2 years, he kept his store closed on Shabbos just for me. Now, it's a difficult thing to do when you're in this environment where people are saying, no, in Jerusalem we don't have that, but so much we don't have that. But people are saying, why are you doing this and why are you doing that, and how can you be such a fanatic, and how can you live such a crazy life? And I don't know if anyone here struggles with belief in Hashem, but I decided at 13 I was an atheist, and it took me a very long time till I decided I was going to believe in Hashem and had a relationship with Hashem. All of these things related to serving Hashem and being connected to Yiddishkeit, we get all of this from Avraham Avinu. Because, Shalom Aleichem, welcome. You can take a chair, sit on the couch, whatever's comfortable for you. Sometimes I meet people and they say, I'm a Einikol. How do you say it? Einikol, somebody know Yiddish?
Grandchild or descendant.
Yeah. Like you know Yiddish. How do you say it in Yiddish?
What?
A descendant. Einikol. I'm an Einikol of, Reb Levi Yitzchak Reb Nietzsche. So I say to them, I'm an Einikol of Avraham Avinu. I have bigger yichus than you. I have the biggest yichus in the world, Avraham Avinu, the first Jew. So we have to remember, how did Avraham Avinu serve Hashem? He did it through this aspect of Echad. He did it through knowing his purpose, avoiding people that were trying to distract him, and being connected with Hashem, which is the aspect of Echad. Okay, play a little bit, and then a little bit more about Avraham Avinu. Shomeh, Shomeh. So everybody knows the Akedah. We say it every morning. And I don't have a sitter here. I'm sure there's a sitter somewhere here, but whatever, it doesn't matter. Then I have to find it, but it's okay. I remember what I wanted to say anyhow. So Avraham Avinu, what blows me away with Avraham Avinu, Hashem says, okay, did you have a question? Okay. If anyone has a question, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to answer questions. I don't know how I'm going to talk for an entire hour, but hopefully I will. So Avraham Avinu, Hashem says to him, hey, Avraham, I got a test for you. I want you to kill your son. And he's like, Hineni. That's what he says.
Yalla.
Here I am, I'm present, let's go, bring it on. What is that? That's a total insanity. But that was Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, he didn't wait. He didn't say, wait Hashem, can I at least spend one more Shabbos with my son? Can I think about this a little bit? Maybe I don't really want this mission in life. Right away he says, Hineni, here I am. He doesn't even say can, he just says Hineni. So that's the aspect of Avraham. Avraham, he did things fast. So I've got a little lesson here, that a note to myself to mark these before I come to the class. But I'll find it. I had this idea that I'm going to get here 7:30, and there's going to be so much time to prepare for the class. And I see there's an event upstairs. They called the rabbi, and they said, what's the deal? They said, yeah, we're having an event. Surprise.
Biggest crowd yet, though?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem.
This is nice.
We can meet down here every week if you want.
Yeah, we'll take a vote.
Can paint the walls.
We'll text our opinions, one for...
Okay, so I'm going to read you something. This is from Reb Shlomo. Shlomo Katz put it together, but it's Reb Shlomo because Shlomo Karlbach said if he ever got around to writing a book, he'd call it Reb Shlomo. So these are taken out from lessons related to the Parsha. Do you know what we always do? We always say we'll do something we took upon ourselves tomorrow. Gewalt, this is the most awful thing in the world. This is absolutely destroying the world. What do you mean you'll do it tomorrow? Not only do I have no right to do it tomorrow, I don't even have a right to delay it for 5 minutes. So the Rebbe say the foundation of Yiddishkeit is to do things fast. Now listen to this. God says to Avraham, take your son, your only son, the one you love, Yitzchak, and bring him as a sacrifice. God didn't tell him why. God didn't tell him when. Avraham could have said, listen, it's true. I have to think about my own son. Let's be together for one more Shabbos, one more Yom Tov. You know when Avraham Avinu left? The next morning. But now listen to this. Okay, so I want to interrupt Reb Shlomo for a second. So there was once the Alter Rebbe. He was traveling and he stopped in this Jewish inn, this tavern. And the way a lot of Jews made their living was running a tavern and a little inn in the middle of nowhere. That was all they could find. You know, it's like sometimes people have to move to some remote city in order to get a job. That's what Jews in Europe were doing. They were moving to these remote locations to run a tavern because everything else was off limits for Jews. You couldn't work in medicine, you couldn't work in law, you couldn't work in finance. Everything was slowly cut off from the Jews. The only thing that was left was the tavern. And the reason was because the Goyim would drink all the liquor and the Jews wouldn't. So they could only hire a Jew to run the tavern, otherwise there would be a problem with the produce, the merchandise. So one time the Alter Rebbe passed by this tavern, and he goes inside and talks with the Jewish innkeeper, and he says to him, what do you do for a minyan every day? He says, I don't have a minyan every day. I daven here by myself. He said, what do you do about your kids' education? He said, I have a melamed. He comes like a few times a week and teaches my kids, but that's it. And he says, and what do you do about the high holidays? He says, the high holidays, I take the family and we go to a town and we're there for the holidays. And the Rebbe says, this isn't good. It's not good for your neshama. It's not good for your kids' neshama. Okay, that's the end of the conversation. The Alter Rebbe goes to sleep. And in the morning, he comes to see the innkeeper, and the innkeeper's not there. He goes outside, and he sees there's 3 wagons filled with all of the innkeeper's stuff. And the kids are already sitting in the wagons, and the Alter Rebbe says, what's going on here? And the innkeeper says, you told me that it's not good for my neshama to be here. so I'm out of here. The Alter Rebbe says, that's the way you serve Hashem. So that's how Avraham Avinu served Hashem. Avraham Avinu was living in Ur Kasdim. Everyone knows that Avraham Avinu's family was maybe the richest at the time. Really top rich people. Half of Ur Kasdim belonged to Terach and Avraham. God says to Avraham Avinu, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Leave everything and go to the Holy Land. When do you think Avraham Avinu left? The next morning. Mamash the next morning. Here, friends, I want to share with you the most heartbreaking story told by the holy Rishon. Rishon was such a holy dynasty, and sadly enough, there isn't much left. One of the Rebbes who was left was the Sadiger Rebbe. He was living in Tel Aviv, and at one time he was in New York. He was in a hotel on 71st and Broadway. He was there for 4 weeks, and they needed a minyan. So I called up to see if I could come. At that time, he didn't want any visitors. He simply didn't have the strength. But he needed 10 people to be with him to have a minyan, and I was privileged to be the 10th man that Friday night. Now in Rishon, the Rebbe doesn't daven in the same room as the minyan. He davens in the other room. Right after Kabbalah Shabbos, the Rebbe sings Shalom Aleichem, makes Kiddush, and then everyone goes home, and later you come back for the Suda. The Rebbe would always tell Torah after Kiddush. I was privileged one Friday night to hear the Torah. I will remember it my whole life. This was the story the Holy Rishon would tell. In the year 1490, the Jewish people in Spain got together and they said, we're so rich, why don't we buy the Holy Land from the Turks? We can go and buy up the whole land. Unbelievable. It was such an awakening. Now in those days, the Jewish community in Spain was maybe one of the highest in the history of the Jewish people. Everyone was a great scholar. Everyone was wealthy. So they asked, why don't we buy it? Why don't we buy Israel from the Turks? Listen to me. You make a phone call to the Sultan of Turkey and you say, brother, you want to sell the Holy Land? How much do you want? We're sending you the money by telegram. In those days, it took about half a year to get to Turkey from Spain. So they appointed 3 outstanding people, mamish great scholars, who would go to the Sultan and talk to him. Now listen to this unbelievable thing. They were preparing so much to go back to the Holy Land that in every little city they appointed committees to teach people the laws of agriculture in the Holy Land, Shemitah. Can you imagine? When you go to the Holy Land, you have to give Truma and Maser. Not only that, but they had a whole school to train priests, the Kohanim, because if they go back, they're going to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, and the Kohanim will have to know how to do the Avodah in the Beit HaMikdash. So they mamash opened the yeshiva for Kohanim, and they taught them everything about the Holy Temple. What a gewalt. They decided that next year on a certain day, they will all come back and they'll hear what the Sultan has to say. This is the most unbelievable thing. In 1491, the 3 people came back. And they said the greatest thing in the world. The Sultan is ready to sell us the Holy Land. The sum of money was no problem because they were the wealthiest people in the world. People mamish started dancing, blowing their minds. We're going back to the Holy Land. Suddenly, one old man gets up and he says, if God wanted us to go back, why didn't he give us a sign from heaven? So someone says, what do you mean a sign from heaven? Do you need a bigger sign from heaven that we have the money and the Sultan wants to sell it? We've done all the preparations. What do you need a sign for? This itself is the greatest sign from heaven. But you know what happens? Suddenly there are already 2 sides. One says, let's go back, and the other says, let's wait for a sign. So they decided, let's meet the next year, in 1492. The most unbelievable thing. They were supposed to meet 4 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Chodesh Elul. There was supposed to be this big conference, and they were going to decide if they would buy the Holy Land or not. Sadly enough, on Tisha B'Av that year, they instituted the Inquisition, and all Jewish money was confiscated. The most mind-blowing story in the world. Sweetest friends, how heartbreaking it is. If you look back, everybody in their own lives. So often we could have done so many things, and we missed out because we waited. You know, friends, I heard from a very big tzaddik that when you come up to heaven, they show you 2 movies. One movie will show you what you could have been. The other movie they show you is what you were. So the tzaddik says like this, if both movies match, you're in heaven. If the 2 movies don't match, it's hell. The lowest hell there is. You know what it means? I could have done so many things I was supposed to do so easily. Why didn't I do it? I'll tell you something which is probably the most heartbreaking thing in the world. Imagine when the Mashiach is coming, what will happen to us if we see maybe that the 6 million could have been saved? There are so many parents and children who can't get it together. I'm sure there were moments when they could have gotten it together with each other. I'm sure there were moments when the children were begging their parents, I just want to talk with you. But at that moment they had to go to a meeting, they were tired or watching television. Talk to me tomorrow, but tomorrow is too late. I want to bless you and bless me back that whenever our children ask us, whatever our children ask us for, we shouldn't put it off. Don't ever put it off. So this is the foundation of Yiddishkeit, because Avraham Avinu was the first Jew. What was the greatness of Avraham Avinu? What made him Avraham Avinu? Some of us think that Avraham Avinu was so great because he understood God on such a deep level. Some people think his greatness is because he did this and he did that. The Heilige Reb Chanoch Chenech says Avraham Avinu was so great because he didn't wait. Gewalt, he didn't wait. He absolutely did not wait to begin his journey. Okay. A long story. We've got 25 minutes, let's say half an hour, and hopefully I'm going to finish the story in that much time. This is the well-known story of the Sophisticate and The Simpleton by Rebbe Nachman. So Rebbe Nachman, in the last few years of his life, he had a short life, so you could say most of his life was the last few years of his life. He said, people aren't getting my Torahs, I need to start giving over stories. And a lot of the stories are very deep, and you can read them and I don't understand what Rebbe Nachman said. But I've got this copy here. The stories are probably about that thick if you didn't have all the commentary, and this is all this extra commentary, but there's one story that you could just get it right away. That's the story I'm going to tell tonight. So I'll just show you. I've got a lot of notes here, and hopefully I'm going to remember the story as we go. If you see me reading from here, you'll understand why. Okay? So there were two kids that were born at the same time in the same town, and they were born to two parents, two fathers that were both wealthy. And these two guys, one of them was really intelligent, and the other one was just this simple, happy Jew. And they grew up together, and even though they were so different from each other, they were very good friends. The sophisticate, who was the intellectual, he appreciated his friend the simpleton, and the simpleton, he appreciated his friend the intellectual. And it happened as they got older that both the parents lost their money, and they lost everything except for their houses. And so they told their sons, okay, it's time for you, you're old enough, time for you to go out into the world and make a living. And so the simpleton, he decided that he was going to learn to be a shoemaker. And so he learned a simple trade. But the sophisticate, for him, learning a simple trade wasn't enough, right? In our day, it would be like being an electrician or a plumber. It wasn't enough for the sophisticate to be an electrician or a plumber. He wanted to have a high-tech company, or he wanted to be a math professor, or whatever it was. So the simpleton, he stays in that town, and he learns to be a shoemaker. But the sophisticate, he decides he's going to go out into the world. And he goes out into the marketplace, and he sees some merchants, and they're on a wagon, and he says to them, where are you guys heading to? And they said, we're going to Warsaw. And he said, can you use some help on the way? He said, sure, you look like a smart guy. You can probably help us. And so he gets on the wagon, and they go to Warsaw. And in Warsaw, as soon as he gets to Warsaw, Warsaw was a city at the time of 70,000 people, and 12,000 of them were Jews. So first of all, it was like a big city. It was like the Manhattan of its time in that part of the world. And there were a lot of Jews there. And so the sophisticate, he's looking around, and he says, the sophisticate in Hebrew is the Chacham. What's it in Yiddish? I've got two Yiddish speakers here. At least two. Chuchem. There you go. And then the Tam is the simpleton. So the sophisticate's looking around and he says, look at this place, and I'm with these simple merchants. There must be something better here. And he says to the merchants, listen, I helped you on the journey, and I hope you appreciate what I did, but I'm on my way now to find something better. Sei gesund, good luck, guys. And he looks around and he sees all these people walking around in fancy clothes, and Rebbe Nachman mentions in this lesson that they had pointy shoes, which is funny that it's a fashion statement again today, at least it was like a year ago. These really long shoes, look like clown shoes. So back then they were a fashion statement as well, and this guy is really impressed by these people with the long shoes. And he catches one of the guys and says, what's your job? What do you do? And he says, well, I work in a clothing store, and I'm delivering clothes to a nobleman. So he says, okay, I'm going to go work in the clothing store. He goes to the clothing store, and he says, you have a job for me? And the shopkeeper says, yeah, sure. I've got work for you. You seem like a smart guy. Except the work was kind of hard, because the way it worked in those days, these days we're not as lucky. In those days you worked from the bottom and you worked your way up. Here a lot of times you just get stuck on the bottom. There isn't a way up. You're just stuck at that job. But there, you'd work in the simple job, and then eventually you'd work your way up. But the work was hard. He was carrying these heavy boxes up the stairs. It wasn't easy for him. And so he said, what do I need this difficult work for? Isn't my goal in life to get married and have children and make a living? And I'm really wasting my time. But I'm not ready for that yet. There's more of the world to see. There must be something better for me. And so he goes into the marketplace, and he sees some merchants with a really big wagon. He says, where are you guys going? They say, we're going to Lagorna. Lagorna is in Spain. See, you're getting a geography lesson as well here. Not just Torah and music, also geography. So they're going to Lagorna in Spain, and on the way they pass through Italy, and then he gets to Spain, And he's going through all these different countries, and he's seeing what people are doing and how they're making a living. And he says, I'm not ready to get married yet. I need to learn like a really good skill that can support me for my whole life. And he looks around and he says, making gold jewelry, that's a real skill. It's not going to go out of style. And so he goes and he gets himself an apprenticeship with a gold jeweler. And this guy is very smart. So within 3 months, he's mastered the craft. Something that would normally take years for people to master. And the goldsmith says, listen, you're even better than me at this point. And so he works as a goldsmith for a little while. But he says, gold might go out of style. I need to find something that's not going to go out of style. Gemstones, they're not going to go out of style. Diamonds and gemstones. So he learns how to, diamonds forever. He learns how to cut gems, and of course it takes him a short amount of time. But then he says, you know what? This also might go out of style. I need to learn something that's never going to go out of style. Medicine. I need to learn to be a doctor. If I'm a doctor, people are always sick, people are always dying, I don't have a problem, I'll always be employed. Sorry. So he knows in order to study medicine, first he has to learn Latin and science and philosophy. And having this genius mind, he learns Latin right away, and he picks up all the science and philosophy. And within a short amount of time, he's one of the greatest doctors around. And he says, okay, now it's time for me to get married. Right now I've got my profession, I've got a way of making money, it's not going to go out of style, I'm going to get married now. But he says, but if I get married here, then nobody in the old town where I grew up is going to appreciate all I've accomplished in my life. So before I get married, I'm going to go back to the town, and everybody's going to see what I made of myself. So he comes back, but on the whole journey back, he was miserable. Why was he miserable? There was nobody for him to talk with. Every place that he stayed wasn't like on the high enough level for him, right? It wasn't really 5 stars. They said it was 5 stars, but it was 2.5 stars, because in Poland, 2.5 is 5. They think 5 is really 2.5 in New York, and everywhere he went, he's like, nah, this is miserable, and he just suffered all the time. Okay, now let's put aside the sophisticate for a little bit and come back to the simpleton. So the simpleton, he stayed in town, and he learned to be a shoemaker. He got married, and he had children, and he would sit there and make the shoes. But he was a simple guy, and for him to make shoes was like a really hard task. And he didn't have any time, because he was working all the time making these shoes. So he would say to his wife, bring me a thick piece of bread. She'd bring him some bread, and he would sit there as he was putting the awl through the hole and drawing the thick thread through the shoes, and take a bite of the bread, and go back to the shoemaking. And all day long he was working on these shoes, working. But he was always happy. He'd call out to his wife and he'd say, wife, it's time for me to eat. Can you please bring me a piece of bread? She'd bring him a piece of bread. And then he'd say, can you bring me some beans and gravy? And she'd bring him a piece of bread. And he'd say, boy, these beans and gravy are so delicious. How did you make something so beautiful? And then he'd say to his wife, now, bring me some meat and some other good foods. And she'd bring him a piece of bread. And he'd eat the bread, and for him, he would say, it tastes so good. This is the most beautiful piece of meat I ever had in my life. For him, he actually tasted it. For him, this piece of bread was like eating the finest meats in the world. And then he would say to his wife, now give me some liquor. And she would bring him a glass of water. He'd drink the water, and he'd say, this is the best liquor I ever had. He'd say, now bring me some wine. And she'd bring him another glass of water. And he'd say, does wine get any finer than this? This is as good as this wine gets. And as far as his clothes went, they had one thick sheepskin coat that they shared between each other. And he would say to his wife, when it was time for him to go to the market, give me the overcoat. And she'd bring him the sheepskin. And then sometimes he would need to go for a special visit. So he'd say, bring the fur coat. And she'd bring him the sheepskin. And he'd say, does a fur coat get any finer than this? This is as good as a fur coat ever could be.
Pelts.
Pelts. And she'd bring him the sheepskin. And when he'd go to shul, he'd say, bring my kapata, bring my silk suit. And she'd bring him the sheepskin. And for him, it was the finest kapata there was. It was the finest fur coat there was. Then he would finish making a shoe. And the shoe came out triangular. Right? It was kind of like a duck's foot. And he would show his wife and he'd say, look at this fine shoe that I made. I spent an entire day making this one shoe. And his wife would say, well, if it's such a fine shoe, how come the other shoemakers make double what you make? He said, I'm not worried about them. That's their work, and this is my work. I have my mazel in life, and they have their mazel in life. I'm not worried about them. I'm very happy with what Hashem gave me. He said, let's just look at this. The leather costs this much, and the glue costs this much, and the thread, and everything. And so this is how much profit I made, and all I have to do is sit here and make this, and I can make money forever. Okay, it's not a lot of money, but it's great, and I'm happy. And this guy was always happy. He was always filled with joy. Everyone else, they thought he was a madman. They thought he was crazy. And they'd make fun of him. And he would say, I don't mind if you want to say things to me, but if you're going to make fun of me, I don't want to hear it. Because what's the point of you making fun of me? I already know that I'm a simple person. That you think that you're smarter than me, that's worth making fun of? That means that you're a bigger fool than me. And so everyone who would make fun of him, he would find a way of turning it around and making them the fool instead of him. Okay, so this is how the simpleton lived his life. Now we have the sophisticate is finally coming into town. And he's coming with a huge carriage and 8 horses in front of him, and there's a big commotion. And the simpleton, he hears that his old friend is coming back into town. And he says to his wife, wife, bring me the fine fur coat. And she brings him the sheepskin. And he puts it on, and he runs out to the sophisticate, and he says to him, my sweetest friend, you're finally back home after all these years. How are you doing? How are things going? At this point, the sophisticate was so sophisticated that nothing impressed him in the world. The world meant nothing to him. He was smarter than everyone. He understood things that everybody else didn't understand. And he looks at this simple madman of a friend who looks crazy. But because he remembered their friendship when they were kids, he was nice to him. And he said, Baruch Hashem, happy to be home, even though he was miserable. Now, while the sophisticate was away, the fathers of the 2 sons passed away, and all that was left were their homes. The simpleton had moved into his father's home, and that's where he lived, which was a mansion. And the other son, the sophisticate, he was away, so the mansion fell to pieces. He was away for maybe 10 years. A wooden house, it just fell to pieces. So he went and stayed in the inn. But the inn, in this little town, if the inns on the way over there weren't good, this was terrible. And nothing was good. The mattress was terrible, the food was terrible, and he was miserable all the time. Now the simpleton, he found like a new profession for himself. As soon as he had the chance, he'd run out of his shop and go to the sophisticate and say to him, my friend, how are you doing? How's it going? And want to spend all of his time around the sophisticate. And he realized that the sophisticate was miserable all the time. So he said to him, listen, I got a huge house. I'll just take all my stuff and move it to one corner. My wife and I, we don't need so much. You can have the whole house to yourself. And he said, a mansion that's in good shape, that's good for me. And so he moves in with the simpleton. And so he starts to work, and a great nobleman comes from a faraway land, and he says to him, here I have a very special gold design, and I want you to make me a duplicate exactly the same way. And so, having the skills that he's made over the years, he makes it an exact duplicate, but he made a tiny little mistake. And he was really upset at himself for making this mistake. But there was no way of going back. The mistake was done. The nobleman comes and he looks at the two and he says, you did an incredible job. This is amazing. I've never seen anything like it. And the sophisticate was really angry, because he said, here's a rich person, but he's not sophisticated enough to understand that I made a mistake. Then somebody comes and says, listen, I need a special tree engraved in a diamond. And he tells him exactly how he wants it done. And he does it exactly like he learned in Spain. Perfect. No, he'd never done a better job in his life. And the guy comes to pick it up, and he says, this is terrible. I don't like it. What is this? And so the Sophisticate was angry that the guy didn't appreciate the finest work. The other one didn't see the mistake, and this one couldn't appreciate the finest work. Then he said, okay, fine, I'm a doctor. I'm not going to work in this profession anymore. And whenever he gives somebody medication, they would say that the medication healed them and it wasn't the doctor. And if, God forbid, a person died, they didn't blame it on the person's health, they blamed it on him. And everywhere he went and everywhere he turned, he was miserable. But he had plenty of money. He didn't really need to work. So he spent some money and he hires a tailor and he says to the tailor, I want you to make me a suit. And this is exactly how you make it. And this is the way that we make it in Italy. And the tailor made it, but the collar, the lapels were a little bit off. And he was furious and he said, how can this be? You don't know any better. I mean, I gave you exact directions. And he said, what are you going to do? So everywhere he went, he was suffering. The simpleton was always happy and he was always filled with joy. But the Sophisticate, he was always miserable. And one day the simpleton, he says to the Sophisticate, what's with you? You don't get it. Look at me, I'm happy all the time. You, with all your wisdom, you're miserable all the time. If you could only reach my level of simplicity, then you'd be happy like me. And the Sophisticate said, God forbid, I could lose my memory, and I could lose my intelligence, and I could lose my health, and then maybe I'd be a madman like you. But you could never reach the level that I'm at. And the simpleton said, for Hashem, anything's possible. Hashem can make me even wiser than you. And the Sophisticate thought this was a very strange thing. Now one day the king makes a visit to the population registry. And he sees that these two guys had been registered in the town as the simpleton and the Sophisticate. And the king wants to know who these two guys are. He thinks this is fascinating, that there's two people named the simpleton and the Sophisticate in one town. The king says, well, wait a minute. If I send messengers to them, they'll be scared to death. The Sophisticate will probably not be able to figure out why the king would be calling him. And the simpleton might think that, God forbid, I want to kill him. And so he decided he's going to send a simple messenger to the simpleton and a sophisticated messenger to the Sophisticate. It wasn't easy to find a simple messenger in the capital because everyone there is sophisticated. Who was the simple person? He was the head of the treasury, because you don't want a sophisticated person to be in charge of the treasury. Finding a sophisticated messenger wasn't a big deal, and the king gives him the instructions, and he says, now before you get there, I want you to stop at the governor on the way and tell the governor what's going on so that they won't be scared, that they won't think that I'm calling them for something bad. It's for something good. I really just want to meet them. And also tell them that they don't have to come. They can come of their own free will. It's just out of my curiosity. Nothing for them to worry about. So the messengers go on their way, and when they reach the governor says, well, the simpleton, he only has the sheepskin. He thinks it's a fur coat, and he thinks it's a kapasa, and he thinks it's all this stuff. But if he's actually going to go before the king, he needs better clothes. So the governor makes sure that the simpleton has better clothes. And the messenger, he comes to the simpleton, and he says to the simpleton, I come with a message from the king. And the simpleton says, well, read it to me, because I can't read the message. So the messenger reads it to him. He says, the king wants to see you. And the simpleton says, are you joking? Is this for real? And he says, yeah, it's for real. So the simpleton, he comes running into the back of the house. He says to his wife, you won't believe it, the king wants to see me. She says, you? Why would the king want to see you? He said, what's the difference? Here's the messenger. The king wants to see me. She said, how? Why? He said, I don't have time for your nonsense. I'm out of here. And he runs out, and there's a carriage waiting for him. And in the carriage, there's fine clothes. And he says, Hashem loves me. Hashem is so great to me. Now, on the way, the governor had been caught stealing some money or taking bribes. Unfortunately, could have been in Yediot Achronot here. Seems to be a trend in this country, so it was back then as well. Rebbe Nachman, with his great vision, could see into the future state of Israel. And Mizrat Hashem, everyone's going to do tshuva, including me, all of us. So the simpleton, the governor was stealing money and taking bribes, and the king decides the simpleton will be a good governor. I need a simple person. I'm done with all these sophisticated people. And when they pass through the capital of that region, they tell him, "You're now the new governor." And he says, "Me, the governor? What are you talking about? Are you serious?" And they said, "Yeah, you're the governor now." Says, "Okay, fine. Where do I go? What do I do?" He says, "You sit here in this chair, and people will come, and you'll judge them." And he judged them with simplicity. He'd say, "You're guilty. You're innocent." There was no sophistication in it at all. He would just see straight through. Now, the people came to love this guy. And the advisors loved him. And they said to him, "Listen, the day's going to come where you're going to have to go before the king." And the king talks about foreign affairs. And he knows all these languages. So we're going to need to teach you some of this stuff for your own benefit. And so he says, "Okay, what do I have to lose?" And so he starts learning all of these secular subjects that he'd never learned before. And then one day the king calls him, and the king's very impressed. He's impressed with his simplicity, he's impressed with his knowledge, and he says, "You know what? I need a minister-in-chief. I need a prime minister. And you're going to be my prime minister." And the simpleton says, "Really, me? I've just been a shoemaker not so long ago, and then the fancy clothes, and the governor, and now I'm going to be the prime minister?" He said, "Yeah, and I'm giving you your own town, and I'm building a wall around the town, and you'll have everything you need." And he became the prime minister. So the Sophisticate, the messenger, comes to him. He says, "I'm here from the king." And the Sophisticate says, "Wait a minute, what are you talking about? You're here from the king? Why would the king want me? What does the king need me for? The king is a great person, and I'm just this Sophisticate in this little town. Why would the king want me?" And the Sophisticate didn't understand this. And he said to the sophisticated messenger, "Let's think about this for a minute." And they start thinking, and then they realize, wait a minute, there is no king. Because no king would care about somebody like me. I mean, I live in this small town, and okay, I'm a sophisticated, intelligent person, but really, what does the king need me for? And the messenger said, "But if there's no king, then who gave me the letter to give to you?" He said, "Did the king put it in your hand?" He said, "No, somebody else gave it to me from the king." He said, "So you see, there is no king. You just think there's a king. You grew up in the capital city, right? You've been there your whole life. Did you ever see the king?" He said, "No, I've never seen him in my life." He said, "So, is there any more proof than that?" He said, "Let's wait until the morning, and I'll prove it to you again." So in the morning, they go out into the marketplace, and they find a soldier. They said, "Soldier, who do you serve?" "I serve the king." "Have you ever met the king?" "No." They started laughing. They said, "You're an idiot. You served the king your whole life. You never even saw the king once in your life." They go to a policeman. They say, "Who do you serve?" "I serve the king." "Have you ever met the king?" "No." "Have you ever seen the king?" "No." They start laughing. What a bunch of fools. Everybody here are fools. And then they started traveling around. They said, "Okay, it's not enough for us to just ask the people in the marketplace. Let's travel the world and ask everyone, 'Have you seen the king? Have you seen the king?'" And they got to the point where they came up with a little quote they said to each other. "This misconception is as true as the idea that there's a king." So they would go around and say, "That's as true as there's a king." And they would go around, and this was like what they were doing. They were just wandering around asking people, "Have you seen the king? Have you seen the king? Have you seen the king?" Eventually they used up their money. There was no ATM, no internet, no PayPal. So they were stuck. So they sold a horse, and they sold another horse, and eventually just started walking around, and they became impoverished peasants that nobody gave any attention to. And one day they come to the capital city, and they come to the town of the prime minister. And there they hear that there's a miracle worker in the town. So they go to see the miracle worker, and this Sophisticate, being a great doctor, he sees all these people, 40 or 50 carriages lined up, people waiting to be healed by the miracle worker. And so he decides he wants to meet the miracle worker, but before that they're a little hungry, and they find a few coins in their pocket, and they go to a little restaurant, or whatever they had back then, a cook shop, whatever it was in those days, and they buy Kretschmer. They buy a little food. There you go. And they start making fun of the miracle worker, and they say the miracle worker is like there's a king. And the restaurant owner, he says, what are you talking about? The miracle worker saved my daughter. And they said, what are you talking about? There is no such thing as a miracle worker, just like there's no such thing as a king. And the restaurant owner kicks them out. So they're sitting outside the restaurant and they're really upset. And then they see the son of the miracle worker. And they start making fun of the miracle worker in front of him. And then, whoever it was, the policeman in the town, he hears this and he comes and he gives them a good beating. And now they're really upset. And they say, hang on a second, we're taking you to court. We're suing you. You have no right to beat us just because we made fun of somebody who's not actually a miracle worker and there's no king. And so they go to the court and the court clerk says, what are you talking about? And they give him a beating. So they get upset and they say, what is this? We're going to a higher court and we're going to a higher court. And eventually they work their way all the way up to the prime minister. And they're standing outside the prime minister's office and there's guards there and the guards are intimidating and they want to burst into the door and just complain to the prime minister. The simpleton, who's the prime minister, he hears that these two are outside. He says, come in. And right away, the simpleton recognizes his friend, the Sophisticate. And he says to him, look at you, all your sophistication. You're just a peasant walking in the streets like a madman. And look at me. I'm the prime minister of this whole country. And I speak foreign languages. And I know about all the politics and the history and science and all the things that you said I could never learn. And the Sophisticate said, okay, it's true you're my old friend, but I'm not interested in talking about that right now. Now there's an injustice, and we need to talk about that. We were beaten up again and again for saying that there's no king. And the prime minister said, what are you talking about? There's no king. Of course there's a king. Who do you think made me the prime minister? And they said, but do you really know he's the king? How do you know he's the king? How do you know that his father was a king and his grandfather was a king? He said, I know, believe me, it's the real thing. He's the king. All of a sudden, there's a messenger that comes in, and he says, the devil is here for the two of you, for the sophisticated and his sophisticated messenger. And the simpleton was fearful, and he was shaking and trembling. And he says to the other two, hang on, I've got to go. And he goes to the miracle worker. He goes to his wife, and he says, what do I do? His wife says, go to the miracle worker. He goes to the miracle worker, and he gives him an amulet. He gives him something to protect him from the devil. And he comes back, and the two of them are waiting, and they're saying, no, when are we going to settle this? And he's like, the simpleton says, aren't you worried about the devil calling for you? And they said, no, there's no such thing as a devil. Come on, we don't believe in any of this nonsense. And again, one of the guards comes in, and he says, the devil's here for you. But this time the simpleton wasn't worried, because he had his amulet. And the Sophisticate, he wanted to continue with the court case, but the simpleton said, what are you talking about? The devil sent for you? And he said, no, it's not the devil, it's my brother. And he's playing a trick on me. And he asked, what does the devil look like? And the messenger describes him. And he said, that's exactly what my brother looks like. It's not the devil, it's just my brother. He's just playing games. So the simpleton says, so you're going to go with him? He says, yeah, give me a few soldiers and I'll go with him. And so the messenger, the sophisticated messenger and the Sophisticate, they go with some soldiers, and all of a sudden the soldiers come back in, and the prime minister says, where's my friend? And he said, I don't know, the two of them just disappeared. They were gone. So where did they end up? They ended up in this place of quicksand, where the devil was sitting on a chair in the middle, and these two guys were just stuck in this sand, in this sticky mud, and they couldn't move, and they're shouting, why are you torturing us? You're not the devil, you're just a bunch of hooligans, a bunch of criminals. I don't believe in the devil. I don't believe in any of this nonsense. And they sat there for years. And one day, the simpleton, he passes by the miracle worker's house. And it reminds him of his friend and the messenger. And he says to the miracle worker, can we get them out? And the miracle worker says, yeah, they've suffered enough. We can get them out, but only if the two of us go. And they go, and the simpleton says to his friend, haven't you suffered enough? And he says, what do you mean for years we've been sitting in this mud pit and these hooligans, I want to bring them to court. And the simpleton says, they're not hooligans, this is the devil. You don't even believe the devil has taken you. He says, no, I don't believe it. And he says, watch this, the miracle worker is going to get you out of here. You've been here for years. And like that, the miracle worker takes them out. And then the Sophisticate had to admit that there was a king. And that's the story. Okay, so now I've got a little piece here from Rebbe Nachman. I'm just going to finish this. The Rebbe's lesson, which discusses simplicity, is a commentary on this story. It teaches that the object of Judaism is not sophistication, but simplicity and straightforwardness. After telling the story, Rebbe Nachman declared, if a prayer is not said properly, it's a triangular shoe. Think about the story itself. A person can have bread, water, and a sheepskin and have a better and happier life than the most sophisticated and wealthiest person, since the latter always tends to be miserable. In the end, things turned out to be the best for the simpleton, who was always satisfied with what he had and constantly cheerful. The one who's sophisticated and thinks too much is always troubled. He's constantly miserable and never enjoys life. And in the end, he can be totally destroyed. His only hope is that the simpleton will have pity on him and help him. Besides this, the story contains very deep mysteries. Throughout these stories are the great mysteries of the Torah. Okay, so thank you everyone for your patience. A little niggling. And now you know the story. For Shabbos, if you want to participate in Achnasat Orchim. Next week we'll do the lesson again, hopefully upstairs. Same time, not the same place. Same bat channel.
Why not the same place?
I don't know, I like it upstairs.
Take a layer.
Nice.